So, what is up, guys? My name is Manik Madaan, and here we have a special guest with us. And this guest just scored a 269 on the USMLE Step 2 CK. And he is a very, very special friend of mine. This guy has so much of knowledge about Step 2 CK. And with the Step 1 becoming pass and fail, Step 2 CK is going to become so much important. And that's why we need to learn on how to go through Step 2 CK prep, because we really don't know. Like, we don't really have that many good resources right now, and this guy has mastered all the resources required for Step 2 CK, and he can probably guide us on the journey for that. So welcome. So
hey everyone.
Hey, so tell us about you, like your whole name and like where you're from right now, and your whole story right now with school and everything.
Okay, my name is Vishwajeet. I'm still not used to saying doctor yet, but I'm a recent graduate from MNC, right?
Okay.
And yeah, and I'm looking to get into internal medicine next year. I mean, 2021. Yeah.
That's great. Tell us, like, so what are your thoughts on, Step 1 becoming pass and fail, and how do you think that's gonna, make Step 2 CK more important, and what's gonna happen? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, Step 1 becoming pass and fail, and what do you how do you think that will make Step 2 CK more important, and what are your thoughts on that?
I'm gonna be honest here. It really sucks that Step 1 is now pass and fail. I mean, it was objective data. Program directors loved it. And my second point is that nobody really knows what's going to go on because things are still volatile. They might implement application caps next year, and that might change the equation a lot. But assuming everything stays the way it is right now, Step 1 pass-fail is kind of a disadvantage for US IMGs, or IMGs in general, to be honest. And the thing is, Step 1 was a really great chance. Now it's just one chance. You got to take Step 2. You got to make sure you just knock it out of the park. And unlike Step 1, where everybody knew what the meta was, nobody's really sure what to do here, right? So yeah, it's kind of uncharted territory. It sucks, but what are you going to do, man? I think it probably places a little bit more of the onus on Step 2, research electives, and basically clinical experience. And it's going to be a little bit harder, I guess, but that's what we do. We have to adapt. There's nothing much, I guess.
We have to do the best we can, according to
exactly, precisely.
What are your thoughts on Step 2 CK, like how it is, and and also Step 2 versus Step 1? Like, what are the difference that you thought, you saw, because you've given Step 1, you've given Step 2, and what do you think are the main differences, and between these two exams?
I think that Step 1 is kind of a more focused exam in general. You don't need a lot of extra clinical acumen. Step 2, in my opinion, just needs way stronger test skills. It's all about differentiating between conditions, knowing what the best step in management is. So I think it's less basic science oriented and a lot more vague. I don't think that it's possible to capture the vagueness of a real clinical scenario in a vignette, but Step 2 does really try. So I think in terms of sheer question difficulty, it's probably the more difficult examination. I mean, I walked out from Step 1 with a smile on my face, not so much for Step 2, really. So trust me, it's not an easy exam, but it's something that you can prepare for, definitely, right? And if you can work on it, it's kind of manageable, right? I don't think I have a surefire formula yet, but I think we can, have the beginnings of a meta. What do you do next? What do you do next? How do you face this exam? So, in terms of question format, the vignettes of Step 2 are much larger, and they require you to sift through a lot of distractors. I've seen there are so many questions where the actual question may be half a sentence, a full sentence, but most of it is just stuff you need to sift through and know that it's not relevant to the question at all. So there's so many more distractors. It's longer, and it's a little bit more vague. So that's what makes it different from Step 1, apart from the focus on clinical experience.
I agree, because right now I'm going through Step 2 prep. By the way, what I think through, when I'm going through Step 2 questions and all through UWORLD and Amboss and all those question banks, I'm seeing a lot of Step 1 in Step 2. It's just one step more. They gave you the same clinical scenario, the same clinical vignette as Step 1. However, they take it one step further and ask you what is the next best step in management. Do you agree with that? Because a lot of Step 2 does depend upon Step 1.
I mean, if you do, I think that this is something that not a lot of people do, but there's a file available online known as the USMLE content outline. And basically, what they test with Step 1, Step 2, and Step 3 are kind of the same. The broad strokes are the same, but the little details are different. I think there's maybe a 50 to 60% overlap. I think the best preparation for Step 2 is just killing Step 1. You're going to see a lot of those concepts again. There are a few kind of, stragglers and, general considerations that are different when it comes to stuff like peds and OBGYN and surgery, but internal medicine is by and large the same. And, you just have to know what the special cases are for each, group when it comes to step 2. So yeah, I do agree, step 1 and step 2, there is a huge overlap, and yeah, I really think they're very similar examinations.
And one more thing I've seen with step 2 is so when you can narrow down between 2 options, like in step 1, it was very easy to come to the answer very fast, right? Like if you narrow down between 2 or 3 options, it was easy to eliminate other things and come to the answer. However, with step 2, it is very tough to do that because both of the answers look very same. And you're like, oh my God, what is the answer? Like it makes you run, it takes your mental energy so much, like each and every question. Like that's what I've seen.
That's true. I mean, especially if you've done your internship before, which I think you have. We basically use a shotgun approach in India. Everybody gets the same labs. Everybody gets a lot of investigations. And most of the time, when you look at the question, you're like, if this was a real scenario, I'd probably do both of these at the same time. Here's the thing. I think it was case-wise medicine. I don't think I've read the entire book, but in the foreword, they actually have a concise clinical algorithm that I encourage a lot of people to read. It gets you, I think that one of the authors was also on the MBBS board. I'm not sure about that. I have to fact check that, but he basically outlines a basic clinical algorithm. Like, do you have a set of questions to ask yourself when it comes to narrowing down 2 options for step 2, So he goes to things like, okay, do you have a diagnosis yet, right? Are you sure you have a diagnosis? If not, okay, get the diagnosis. If you have the diagnosis, is it confirmed? Can you act upon it? If not, yeah. Are there any comorbidities? So there's a really nice flow chart that you could probably add to this video, and I think that it really helped me with my decision making. So maybe we could add in that to help people out. I mean, I do think this is a really common question that everyone has. So yeah.
Case-wise medicine, yeah.
It's a page in Case-wise medicine. I believe that you can find it online. The publisher has actually made it available online, so you can definitely take a look at that. Apart from that, I think another thing that might really help is just experience. Let's be honest, the NBME itself has a lot of idiosyncrasies. They expect you to know that this is the right answer, and half of that just comes with experience and knowing what to use and what not to use. So I think that, it's a different focus. It's something that it certainly takes some time to get used to. I think it took me like 2 or 3 months in the beginning to just figure out, okay, you should be doing this next, you should be doing this next. But once you get used to it, it gets a little bit easier. I'm not going to lie. There have been times on the exam where I just randomly picked something and moved on because it's just too hard. But yeah, in most cases, you can figure out an answer. But it is harder. It definitely is harder. Yeah.
Okay. So, by the way, just let us know your step 1 score. What was your step 1 score?
Oh yeah, I scored 261 on step 1.
That's crazy. That's awesome.
So pretty close to yours. Yeah. So getting past that 260 it's something else.
Yeah.
I mean, everything up to it takes a little bit of luck, but it's definitely possible to put the work in.
Take us through your step 2 journey, how much time it took, and how much average time it took per day for your preparation, what was your timeline, and just make us go through that. And when did you prepare for it? Which year were you? And that all.
So I happened to take step 1 after I graduated. I spent some time actually, just working as a medical officer for a while, just getting some experience. I wasn't really sure I was going to do this. So I took step 1 after I graduated, and immediately after I finished step 1, I started studying for step 2, right? Fair warning to anybody that is going to do this. Some people don't have a choice, but if you have a choice, try to take a couple of days off, because burnout is a real thing, and I was personally affected by it. So yeah, but apart from that, so I think I took about 4 to 5 months. Actually, I think an extra month in there just because I was kind of burned out, but I was putting in maybe 6 to 7 hours a day, a little bit longer on good days. And yeah, I took the first 2 months just to go through my resources, develop a solid foundation. And the last month was pretty much going through the NBMEs and CMS Forms and just getting ready for the exam. The rest of the time was just spent doing UWORLD and practicing questions. So that's a general outline. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And let us know what resources did you use, and what resources, by the way, you thought were the best for step 2 prep, because right now there's so much of confusion regarding step 2 CK because there are not many good resources. Because see, for step 1, everybody knows first aid is the big deal and you need to do first aid well to nail it down. However, for step 2 CK, that's not the rule, right? There is no one good resource. Like, so tell us about that, like the best resources that you think do exist right now.
Well, I think we've talked about this before, but my initial effort was to recreate what the third years do in the US. I thought if I do everything they're doing, I should be able to get a great score. But not only is that process probably overkill, it's going to take a lot of your time, right? So the question that if I may rephrase your question, the question is, okay, so what do you need to study? What does the MBA expect from you? And so that's what I'd like to try to answer. So for CK, you don't need to know a lot about everything. You just need to know a little bit about some of the most important conditions that you might face as an intern, right? Because the CK is written with interns in mind, fresh interns. So you really don't need to know all of these at a specialist level, but you do need to know almost an ocean of conditions, and you need to know about a little bit about all of those, So I'd say it's almost an ocean in terms of vastness, but in terms of depth, all you have to know is just a little bit, almost, it's very shallow. I don't know the exact terminology or the phrase, but yeah, it's something similar to that. Okay, so about all of these resources, a couple of years ago, the exam pattern was kind of different, right? It was more recall based, and that's where MPB actually kind of helped. And I think that's why if you visit the old forums, everybody's saying MPB 2 and 3, MPB 2 and 3, and Gynec and Peds. But
that's master the boards. Is that master the boards?
Master the boards, yeah. So while I still think that Master the Boards is a great product, I think that they've kind of moved away from that meta. It's still a good reference material, but I really think that UWorld is where it's at, right? So I think UWorld is entirely comprehensive for something like internal medicine, and it provides a great outline for everything else. So if for those of my friends that really do want to use a textbook, I'd say just pick one and realize what they're asking. Just look at all the conditions that they're talking about. See if you can go search their algorithms, because algorithms and management decisions is something that most textbooks do not have, and you'll have to search for them on your own. But use most of these textbooks as kind of more as a guide, as a guideline, rather than something that will just spoon feed all the information you need to know. You still have to do a lot of effort, put in a lot of effort, referencing the content outline, referencing the guidelines, referencing algorithms. All these can just be found with a quick Google search. I want to shout out the American AAFP website, which has a ton of great algorithms if anybody wants to use them. Right? So you have to realize that most of these prep courses, what they recommend, are usually for AMGs that study step 2 along with the third year. So it's actually more geared towards introduction and teaching rather than discussing the fine points of what is going to show up on the boards. So I think this criticism, especially, it's kind of applicable to something like OME, right? So I think the guy provides a decent foundation, and some of his videos are informative, but I find that they do not have the required depth that you need. So I would say that if you really if you really learn well from videos and you have nothing else, it's a great resource to reference, but you still have to put in a lot of that work on your own. It can either be by doing question banks or referencing the internet, but you'll have to do a lot of that work.
But it's totally not like boards and beyonds, right? Like boards and beyond, everything you needed to know. But
yeah, boards and beyond is the king. Yeah, that's true. Plus
what I've noticed with OME is some of the videos are like really old. So the algorithms keep on changing, the drugs keep on changing, yet the videos are not getting updated.
Don't you agree? The thing is, textbooks are usually the last to change, and especially in the US, people don't really read textbooks anymore. They always look at primary literature because you have to be updated to this. So I don't really blame the guy. It's just the format. The guy's probably busy attending. He really doesn't have time to come back and change all of these. So yeah, it may be a couple of years behind the curve, but it's a decent starting point. What can I say? So I would say instead of that, if your basics are decent, just delve straight into UWorld. But yeah, so other resources, Master the Boards. While if you look at the forums from after 2005, everybody's saying Master the Boards 2 and 3, Master the Boards 2 and 3 with some extra reading. I don't really think that it's that great anymore. I feel like they kind of focus on minutia that really doesn't show up on the step, and it's not the greatest resources. It doesn't have stuff that you actually need. And once again, because it's a textbook, the criticisms that we had for OME once again apply. Algorithms not always there. They don't always have the best, like if you have a patient with XYZ, what is the next best step? It really won't help you with that. So, like I said, I think I think the best approach to CK is just to get to the testing phase as quickly as possible, because I don't think any of these resources really help you that much. These are more like kindergarten before real school. They just help you out a little bit, but not too much, right? First aid for CK. There's a lot of divided opinions about this, and to be honest, I found that once again, there's a lot of things that aren't that great. If you just need something to like scribble down your notes and buy it. I'm not your boss, but once again, if you can avoid it, avoid it. It's really not worth your time, unlike it was for step 1, right? Other resources, step 2 secrets, which was endorsed by Dirty USMLE. Once again, great for third years, not great for the IMG. So what is my advice to IMGs? I think our situation is kind of different. We're not really learning when we're reading any of these AMG-focused textbooks. We're really just revising. We can just fly through them, right? So I think especially for surgery and pediatrics and OBGYN, some of our knowledge is just not up to what they expect it to be, because our guidelines are kind of different, our approach is different, our resources that we have available are kind of different, and we kind of focus more on clinical examination, clinical findings. We don't really focus on algorithm trees or anything like that. So if you are an IMG and if you're finished with final year, right, I'd really suggest that you go through Neurology or Pestana, depending on how much time you have. And
okay, that's for which subject?
That's for surgery, by the way. Yeah.
Okay.
And
did you go like through it totally? Like, did you like fully read it?
I think that De Virgilio, the entire book actually, is probably one of the best written books out there. I mean, if I found it in final year, I definitely would have been a surgeon, not an internal medicine aspirant. It's that great. It's pretty light reading, I mean, despite the complaints that it's pretty heavy. As somebody who's used to reading textbooks a lot, I could finish it in like 3 to 4 days max. And it's not a lot of new material. Yeah, okay. It's not a lot of new material at all. It's not really daunting. And I think this goes for most people. You can just finish it within a week. So it's not too much time. If you are doing your electives while you're studying for the CK, probably skippable. But if you have some time and you really want that high score, especially after this is going to be a pass-fail thing, it's definitely worth a look. I'd say the same thing for Pestana. I really think that maybe they could add a little bit more info on blunt trauma, head and neck trauma, and urological trauma, especially in De Virgilio. But for the most part, it's pretty great. They have wonderful differential diagnosis lists. They have wonderful algorithms, and it's so wonderfully written. So I definitely think it's something you should go through. Right. Okay. Pestana is similar, but a little bit shorter, right? So if you're short on time and you just need some kind of framework for surgery, go for it, right? I mean, especially if you're just looking to get a 250 or something similar, you're gonna be all right, probably, right? And when it comes to pediatrics, now, I had the misfortune of getting a form that was very heavy on pediatrics. Fortunately, I read a lot of pediatrics because A, I have a lot of friends that are doing pediatrics right now, and B, I actually kind of enjoy it because it's similar to internal medicine. If you really want to know everything that's going to come from the step, you could try BRS Peds. It's a heavy book, unlike De Virgilio. The questions are great, and they'll have everything that could possibly show up on the exam. I think that at least if you don't have time to go through the full book itself, there's a couple of starting chapters, right? I mean, especially when it came to Karnataka, everybody said, if you're reading OBGYN for final year, just read the first 11 chapters. I think the same thing applies here. There's newborn screening, adolescent health checkups, screening of risk factors for pediatric patients. All of these are very important for the step. All of these are wonderful in that book. So it's a great reference, right? Okay. So if there's anything that you don't know in peds, use it at least as a reference book. You could probably skip over most of the internal medicine sections, but it's definitely worth the read if you want a really high score. If you're really gunning for the 270s, definitely check it out. OBGYN. Now that you could probably skip, let's be honest. Okay. I really think that Datta, or after reading any of those large Indian books, you're probably over-prepared. What you really want to know is how do you take care of a regular pregnancy if you are a provider in the US? And to that, you just need to look at the guidelines. I think that just referencing the Amboss library is enough. And this is given that you're doing UWIS. UWIS is an excellent adjunct to do if you have the time. Once again, all of these are nice to haves, none of these are must haves.
What is
right?
UWISE? What is UWISE?
UWISE is a question bank that is from the makers of APGO. I mean, it's made by the American Gynecology Association. I'm really not getting the name. So it's by those guys. It's used by most AMGs when they prep for the shelves. It's a group of 500 questions, right? And some of our more enterprising friends have actually put it out in the form of flashcards. So you can just do the flashcards, or you can do the questions online. I think you can purchase the bank for $60. So if you really want to get the most out of it, and if you want to prepare for the eventuality that you're going to get an OBGYN heavy form, it's definitely worth looking at, right? I don't think you really need a textbook if you want something to flip through, and if you don't remember much of OBG. You could look at case files, but I think it's kind of overkill. I think UWorld does a great job, so you really don't need to do too much. So I'd say UWISE, look at the guidelines and care of a pregnancy, and you're pretty much set for that, right? And two more subjects. Neurology. If you've done well for step 1, don't study it. You don't need to, right? If you want to review, just open the step 1 section, open Words and Beyond, and trust me, there's not much that's different. And maybe ask you a couple of extra questions on identification of dementias, but it's not that hard. So I'd say, you know what, just go back to step 1, read about the rule of force for strokes again, read about localization, and you're pretty much set, right? So that's more good news, more corners you can cut. Finally, psychiatry. Psychiatry, a lot of people have a problem with it, especially when it comes to the drugs. So for all of you that have forgot what you've read for step 1, or that are attempting this new, MedBullets has an excellent, MedBullets, once again, is a website that provides step material. They have a free table that anybody can reference, where they have all the psychiatric drugs that you'll ever be asked about. So if you want to do a comparative study, go for it. Once again, you don't need to study it, but I found that it was a valuable resource. Do you need a textbook to study for psychiatry? Probably. Our psychiatry training wasn't very rigorous. It's not very different from what you find on step 1, but there are treatment nuances that are probably best served by, you can probably just do UWorld, but if you really want a textbook, once again, First Aid for the Psychiatry Clerkship is an excellent reference, right? You don't need to read the whole book, but just whatever you week on, So for psychiatry, just basically UWorld, some Googling, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So to summarize, a lot of the resources that are available right now are basically aimed at third years that are studying the US. They may or may not be applicable to people in India, right? Oh. So if you're someone that just wants an average score, I'm talking about 240s, 250s, should probably be best served by just doing UWorld and maybe supplementing it with Amboss. However, if you want textbooks, go do the resources that I mentioned above, right? Yeah.
Okay, and so you mentioned Amboss. What are your thoughts on Amboss as an overall resource? Because Amboss has a really great library that I've seen has like everything updated, like with up to date and everything else. Like it has a lot of references, and I think it's great. Like, what do you think about Amboss, like the Amboss library itself for step 2 prep, like instead of textbooks?
You could use that. I mean, I think you could get away with it. It probably has most things that you do need. I'd still say that you'd have to do a little bit of Googling on the site, but it's pretty comprehensive. I think that an advantage that Amboss specifically has is that it also has step 1 material you can just glance over while you're just sifting out the step 2 information. And occasionally you might be faced with a couple of easy questions about step 1 material. And I've heard this happens for step 3 as well. So if you think that you weren't going to get lysosomal storage diseases again, guess what? You are. You think that pediatric immunodeficiency is going to go away? Nope, you're going to get that again. Genetic diseases? Yes, you're going to see that again. Unfortunately, this is the reality. So I think that looking at the Amboss library might be really helpful when it comes to that. The question bank is pretty great too, in my opinion. I actually used it as something I'd do before UWorld, just to get just to see how the questions were. I think I ended up doing maybe 3/4 of it, and I believe that it really rounded out my knowledge well. I think you definitely agree, the difference between a guy who gets a 250 and a 260 is just that the guy who did the 260 probably saw the same concept 2 to 3 times in different angles. He probably got it wrong a couple more times, so he remembers, yeah, this is the right option there. So more questions are definitely going to help. One final thing about Amboss, some of these questions are extraordinarily difficult, and even compared to the step 1 questions that they have. So if you're getting a couple of them wrong, don't really worry about it. I'd say that the question style isn't really reminiscent of the real exam. I think they're wrong for the wrong reasons. I mean, they're difficult for the wrong reasons, but practicing at a higher difficulty will definitely help. And learning in those nuances, if you get one of those weird questions, then you might be able to answer it. So yeah, I really remember like maybe 3 to 4 questions where I got it right just because of Amboss. So that's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let us know how like your timeline worked, like how you did Amboss first. Like you said, you prepared for step 2 CK like in 4 to 5 months. You took a 1 month break and then you did like a 4 to 5 months like a prep, a solid prep. And how did you manage like UWORLD, Amboss, and all these materials? Like how did you manage that in just 7 hours a day, like on an average? Yeah.
So yeah, I don't really take days off. So when I'm studying, I'm pretty much locked in, right? So my goal was to do at least 120 questions a day, right? And
my God, 120 questions, like a lot.
I mean, that's on a good day. Sometimes it's 80, but yeah. And I'm a big fan of trying to read as much as possible, right? So what I used to do was I'd read one of these primary resources. I clubbed internal medicine and pediatrics together because they are very similar. And if I felt in the mood, I'd just do Amboss first, right? And then I'd graduate to UWORLD. So my algorithm was take a look at the resources, do a little bit of Googling, right? Just make sure you know it well. Go to Amboss, and finally, I think I kind of used UWORLD almost as a testing material. You know, my first pass percentages were kind of high-ish because of the amount of work that I put in. So I kept doing that, and I think that at this rate, you could probably, if you're doing a lot of questions, you could probably finish it in maybe 3.5, 4 months. It's not a big deal, but if you don't want to burn out, throw an extra couple of 15 days to 1 month in there just to relax, take a break.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's say like for Amboss, how much time did you use to take? Because Amboss is a library and I'm doing Amboss right now. The thing with me is I like to go in depth about everything. So if I do 40 questions a day, right, just for Amboss right now, because like I just got over with my step 1 and I'm kind of chilling out, but I'm trying to do something. Like it takes me a lot of time, right? So doing 40 questions and then going and reading up everything about that, why this is the answer, why this is not the answer. That takes a lot of time. Like how did you manage that with Amboss?
To be honest, when it came to Amboss, if I got a question wrong, I'd probably scan over where I went wrong and maybe do a quick referencing. I don't spend as much time as I did for UWORLD, right? And the second point I'd like to say is, especially initially when you're getting used to things, you'll be a lot slower because you're still feeling things out, trying to, you're basically studying, so you're just trying to guess what the examiners will ask for the real exam. So it kind of takes a while to get that idea. I think that you'll be a little bit more, most people are a little bit more efficient when it comes to studying, especially towards the end. Once you have a general overview of what is acceptable, what is expected of you for step 2, right? I think that when it comes to right answers, if it was an Amboss, I'd just quickly read the explanations. I'm a fast reader, but I'd just go through that, and I wouldn't take as much time as I did on UWORLD though. There I went in depth, even read the references if I had to, and went through that. I think that most people that score pretty high are kind of OCD about detail, and just learning the right amount of how much you should study, that's kind of a struggle, especially in the beginning. So a question that I would always ask myself is, do I know enough about this, right? Do I know everything an intern needs to know? Not more than that. I'm not looking at something that a specialist needs to know. Do I know just enough to keep this patient alive, just in case I see him on the wards? I'm not trying to study more than that, mostly, right? And the third point that I usually have is, what else might I see? So if they're asking this question, this presentation, are there any similar presentations that I can also look up and I can also see? So I'd say, yeah, I don't take too much time when it comes to just reading the library. I don't usually reference the entire learning card itself, but I just do some focused reading and move on. I just spend so much more time on UWORLD, and that's where I think most of the money is, when it comes to step 2 prep. Yeah.
Okay. And so one more thing is about Anki, because I haven't mentioned it in my first video. And so what are your thoughts on Anki for step 2 CK? Like deck that you would tell is good, and is Anki like a thing for step 2 CK as it is for step 1? The step 1 you have a lot of good decks.
Oh yeah. I mean, I personally used Anki for step 1, and it clearly worked. I'd say you have to use Anki for the right reasons. I mean, if step 2 is not necessarily an exam that tests memorization, but you do have to know a couple of basic concepts, and that's where Anki really comes in. It really helps you dive in those details and make sure it really helps you remember what you need to know, right? So there are a couple of great pre-made decks out there. There's always has been this debate on whether you should make your own decks or whether you should use other people's. I say if you're running short of time, just get somebody else's deck, right? If you can make your own Anki cards, that's great, but it's a very time-consuming process, and who knows if you're going to come back to that. Maybe you're going to be a master of that. You're going to see 3 to 4 questions, and you might just remember it that way. So I think that maybe, I don't know, maybe this is just on Reddit for step 1. I think it's a little overhyped, but just to remember the things that you need to remember, Anki is pretty cool there. So I'd say use it a lot, maybe fiddle around with the settings so that you don't have to memorize everything. I personally used the Anki deck, and I used it after UWORLD, which is kind of unorthodox. And by that time, I was probably suspending maybe 80% of the cards. So I'd say it's definitely worth looking into if you keep forgetting things. But if not, yeah, you can just probably use it as a checklist or something like that, which I've seen a couple of people actually do, right? So to summarize, if you need to memorize something, Anki's great. But it's not everything for the exam. So if you're not using Anki, don't feel bad.
Okay. So what about UWORLD? Okay, so UWORLD is the best resource, and we know that for step 2 CK. And how many passes did you go for? One, just a first pass or 2 passes? And what are your thoughts on approaching UWORLD? How to approach it?
Okay, so UWORLD is probably the best resource out there, hands down. I think that when it comes to something like internal medicine, you don't even need anything else. I did a lot of extra study for internal medicine. I even feel that it's overkill at this point. UWORLD has everything, absolutely everything that you need to know, right? By that, I do not mean that it has everything spoon-fed or you're going to have everything. They'll just give you hints. They'll say that a question that you see on the step might have been one of the wrong answers on UWORLD. So I'd say read every question carefully. And once you're done reading the question, right, make sure you can distill it down to its essence, right? So if there's a long presentation, you should be able to just highlight what the clinical scenario was, right? After that, most of the time, UWORLD questions are so well written. I mean, this is just my general approach, but I usually try to form a diagnosis even before I look at the options. That way, even when I'm going through other things, it just helps you, right? Because that's what the NBAB says. The questions should be written in such a manner that even without the options, you should be able to make a reasonable decision. So I'd say try practicing without that. And once you got the answers, right, I don't really think that the hate that people have for doing UWORLD in systems mode is warranted. I personally have been using a system-based learning method for a very long time. If you want to do random, that's up to you.
Not random. Okay.
No, it's always systems-based, right?
Okay.
No, I mean, if you're scoring more than like 70 to 80 on random, I'd say just go do random. It might help you out. But if you're scoring a little bit lower, you might just want to take a look at doing it systems-based. So I did a systems-based. I always did the entire block first, right? And then I read it. Once again, I don't get the hate for tutor mode. If you're feeling bored, go do tutor mode, But just make sure you read it. You read all the explanations. You know why, what is right, what is wrong. And you need to keep in mind 2 things, right? A, you have to start learning the language of the pores while you're doing your work. So you have to look at what are the common distractors. What are the random phrases that they throw in just to key you into the right diagnosis, right? What are commonly used distractors? There's like a bunch of phrases that they just throw in there, right? They'll say that a neonate has cyanosis in the peripheries. The fact is, most neonates do. It's not even significant. So unless it's in the context of a very severe cyanotic disease, it means nothing, right? Just like a silent murmur in a child means nothing. They'll just throw it in there just to confuse you. And you should actually also have a mental note of those 2 because we're just looking to increase the efficiency of your pattern recognition, which I think is very important. And finally, so you're done reading the questions, you identify the distractors, you know what the clinical limit is. Finally, right, so once you actually have this matrix of most common conditions in a system, how you can differentiate them and how they're presented, one final thing you want to do is maybe look at some of the primary resources again, see if there's any other diseases that UWORLD hasn't covered, or maybe they're just partial algorithms. Just want to quickly Google that, see if there's anything you missed. If you do that, you should be in a really good place for the exam. So I say just read everything well, even if you know to get it right, and make sure you understand every single word, and it should serve you well for the real examination.
And how many passes did you do for UWorld? Is it just one or two?
So it really depends on how much time you have. So if you're doing something like Anki, right, and Anki, they basically have most of UWorld included in it again. So if you're short on time and you're doing Anki, I really don't think it's the best use of your time. I personally did one pass, and on the second pass, I realized I remembered most of it. Fortunately, unfortunately, I was getting more than like 90-95%. So I realized it wasn't really worth my time. So I did 1.5 passes. I didn't really do my incorrects, and that's it. So I say that if you're getting close to like 85 or 90% on your second pass, maybe not as worth as much to you. But if you're getting less, it might be worth going through UWorld once again just to make sure you know the basics, which will show up on the exam. So one pass at least. If you're doing Anki, that's probably enough, especially if you're short on time. If not, if you have the luxury of time, go through it twice, unless you remember more than like 95%. Yeah, that's my recommendation. Yeah.
Okay. So, and how much time did you take? So just regarding UWorld for one block and going through all of it, right? Just like first answering questions and then, going through the whole block, covering all the explanations. How much time did it take for you for the whole block?
So initially, yeah, unlike step one, you really can't even finish a block quickly, right? So my first pass, I was almost always had maybe like 4 or 5 minutes left, which is in stark comparison to step one. So it took me an hour to go through a block, solve the questions, and then maybe 1.5 to sometimes even 2 hours just to go through the answers again. And then maybe another half hour if this is a new system and I don't really have a generalized idea yet. The thing is, I did a lot of work before I went to UWorld, so there's not a lot of very new things that I didn't know yet. So I'd say on average, it took me maybe, 2.5 hours in total to finish a single block of UWorld. Yeah.
So 1 hour to do it, and like the whole block.
Another 1.5 just to review the questions, and sometimes a little bit more than that, depending on how well I know the topic.
Okay, and that's because you knew a lot of stuff before, because that makes you faster, right? Because you already know it, having a browser. Yeah. So that makes sense. And okay.
No, especially if you've done something like Amboss beforehand, there's a lot of redundancy between these two question banks, because if you're done with Amboss, and I was doing both of them at the same time, so a lot of the concepts are repeated, so you really don't need to go into like complete detail afterwards. So you can probably just skip that a little bit, but make sure you go through the right answers and the wrong answers again. So yeah, I was saying, so you can be a little bit more efficient that way. Yeah.
Okay. So after this, so tell us about practice tests. So how do you approach practice tests? What practice tests did you think? Like, by the way, what practice test was the most predictive for you for the whole exam, and all about practice tests? So just tell us about that.
So unlike for step one, where the NVMEs were probably extremely predictive, there's a lot of resources on step two practice tests that tell you how bad they are, frankly. See, by the NVME's own data, right? They're spread. If you look at the graph for step one, the graph looks like this, right? So that means if you score within a given range, you're probably going to fall under that curve. For step two, it looks like this. So the variation itself, there's a lot of people that score plus or minus 20, and plus or minus 20 is not an acceptable, predictive value, if you ask me. So the NVMEs are not as great. I'd say that they're still great practice tests, definitely, and they really give you an idea of what they might ask. So there are 3 NVMEs. I think NVMe 6 is probably in the old question style. So if you don't have the time, skip it. It's not really worth your time. NVMe 7 is just weird. You will get a lot of weird questions on the real exam, but it's not really indicative of the real exam. And frankly, NVMe 7 is one of those exams. It's like NVMe 20 on step one. It just destroys everybody's confidence. And it's sad. Half of step one, being able to succeed is just having a lot of confidence. And if you really don't have that, it's just a shame. So, and NVMe 8, that's the opposite, but it really overpredicts sometimes. So there are people who score 280s that end up just getting a 250 on the real exam. So it's really up there. The NVMEs are famously bad when it comes to something like this. The UWSA 1 and 2, those are really great examinations. I think that if you take the average of your score on that, you should have a pretty accurate idea of where you're going to really fall. right? I think you can get
Okay.
additional data on score prediction from predictme.com, or you can use the spreadsheet on Reddit. So, but yeah, UWSA is probably the most predictive exam out there. I think I scored 3 points above my UWSA score, right? And
So 272, right? Like,
no,
I don't know,
I actually beat it. I had a 266, and
56, yeah.
my UWSA one was 278. So yeah, take the average, I was somewhere in there, right?
Yeah.
And one final caveat, I really find that UWSA is kind of great in the plus 250 range and maybe the below 220 range. In the middle, there's kind of a higher variation because, you know, a couple of questions right and wrong, it really skew to either side of the distribution. So if you're in the 240s and you need at least a 240 on the examination, I'd say be careful, you know. You probably want to do a little bit more studying if you don't want to take a risk, especially if this examination is going to be that important. So it's really predictive in the high range and in the low range. In the middle, not as much, which is surprising. Not in the really high range, but like medium to high range, it's super predictive. But in the middle range, not so much. So be careful there. That's what I'm going to say.
Right? So let's talk about free 120 and the CMS forms, and like how you should approach them. Tell us about like the free 120 and the CMS forms, because
Yeah.
as an alternative to the NBMEs and UWS.
So the free 120s are the free 120, especially the new one that was taken down. I think it's almost identical to the real deal. Some of these questions fell straight from the exam. They're similar in difficulty. They're similar in terms of distractors. And I think the best thing is they have a lot of very vague and weird questions, similar to what you'll find on the exam. A lot of quality improvement stuff, a lot of risk factor based questions, a lot of general, really weird things. You wouldn't even think that this might be a question on the step. Really weird stuff like that. So I think that probably free 120 is probably one of the highest quality test resources that you can look at. I don't know how predictive it is. We still don't have data on that, but in terms of just practice, it's absolutely fantastic practice. So if you can get your hands on it, you should definitely do that. And I'm talking about the free 120 that was released as of March 20th, right? It was taken down, probably put up again, and you could probably find it on Ben White's website if anybody's looking for it. Okay. And coming to the CMS forms. So what are the CMS forms? CMS forms are like mini NBMEs you can do for each subject, right? So in total, I think there's maybe like 1,800 questions in total, right? They're not
That's a whole separate question bank. That's like a whole separate question bank.
So how many did I do? I did pretty much half of them. I don't think you need them for internal medicine. Maybe look at forms 5 and 6, just the very new ones. There are a total of 6 forms for each subject, right? And you probably only need to do 5 and 6 if you're in a hurry. If you're not in a hurry, you can do all 6. But they're really nice in introducing you to the language of the boards and telling you what the NBME likes to test. Are they as difficult as a real exam? No. But they do have a lot of weird and vague concepts that's not covered in UWORLD, that's not covered in the NBME, that may show up on the real exam. So if you're really gunning for that super high score, you should take your time, do the CMS forms. You can do them much faster. These are only 50 questions each, right? So you can probably sit down in a day, finish a whole subject, all the NBMEs of a subject. And you should especially do that if you're weak in a subject. Just download all the NBMEs or just get the notes, which are once again available online, and just go through these concepts. Even if you're not solving questions, just see what they'd like to ask, what they consider fair game for the step, and how they present these diseases. And it's excellent preparation. So this is a whole other question bank that you can also do. Really helpful to just dial in those concepts once you're near to the exam. So if you really want that high score, definitely look at the CMS.
Okay, that's so there are about 30 to 35. Like, are there more like 35? Because you said 50 questions per CMS, so there must be like for 1,800, it must be about 35 or something. 36, 37.
There are a lot of questions. Thing is, there are things that you can skip. There are CMS forms, or emergency medicine and family medicine. I think family medicine, do one of those. Don't do all of them. Waste of your time. Emergency medicine, waste of your time. Neurology, I think it's actually way more difficult than questions you'll find on this step, but this is only about neurology, but that might be worth your time, but it's probably a little bit overkill. Internal medicine, if you're weak at it, do it. There's only There's 6 of those, so there's quite a few actually, and it's not just like the 4 main disciplines. OBG has its own CMSs, Neurology has its own CMS, emergency medicine has its own CMS. You really only need to do surgery, pediatrics, and OBG, and psychiatry if you're weak at it. And you could probably, depending on the time, you could, add in the others if you're feeling like it. You don't need to do all of them. You just need to do the newer ones. And if you have time, you can do all of them.
Okay, makes sense. One is about 8 hours. Step 2 CK is about 9 hours. Like, how did you manage your time? Like, how did you go throughout the whole test day? Like, what were your rituals and everything?
To be honest, step 2 is way more tiring. You think it's just one block, but it definitely isn't. It comes down to 2 things, right? The clinical vignettes are way longer. The random questions that you get are way more difficult. And there's that extra block, and it's nagging at you. So my experience was that by the time I got around to writing step 2, my exam was delayed once. And this was not due to corona, this was due to something else. But yeah, I was pretty much, when I went into the exam center, I just wanted to get over with it, And I really think that helped me not overthink in the exam hall. Sometimes overthinking can really lead to, picking the right answer after you pick the wrong one. I mean, after you pick the right one. So I'd say my mentality was to go in expecting the worst, right? If I see a really difficult question, which you definitely will, I'd say laugh it off. It's really not even worth your time, right?
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, I'm really not going to have any revelations in the exam hall. So if there's something I don't know, I'm just going to pick an answer and move on. That's going to save your time. So when it comes to length, all of these vignettes are much more difficult to sift through. Step 1, they're really straightforward, and I maybe had 20 minutes left at the end of each block. That's not really the case with step 2. You maybe have 3 minutes, 4 minutes left. If you're marking more than if you're marking more than 10 questions, you're going to be in a tough place because you're not going to have time to review. You just pick the right one. You just pick the one that's most probably the right one, and you just move on, right? Caffeine is a necessity, right? If you can handle Red Bull, and if you're not going to be super jittery, take it, right? Take it as much as you can. Get some candy bars if you're not going to have a sugar crash afterwards. And to be honest, I think just going in with the mindset of saying this is going to be probably one of the most difficult exams I've ever faced out there. But even if it does become difficult, I'm just going to laugh and move on. And if you don't spend your time getting hung up on those tough questions, I say that maybe 60% of the questions are actually fairly reasonable, right? So if you just do those well, you should be in a great place. You just have to get the easy questions right. Don't worry about the rest, and you're going to get a great score.
Okay. Right. And how do you structure breaks, by the way? Because nobody talks about it. So breaks between different blocks, like how did you structure that?
Well, to be honest, whether I take a break or not depends on how badly the last block went. I mean, if you're really mentally fatigued, go take that break. If you're in a zone, if you're in that flow state where everything is going, you're just answering questions, everything is right, you're not having a lot of questions, everything is just coming to you, I say it's safe to maybe do 2 blocks straight. But unlike step 1, don't try to gun 3 blocks, right? So I'd say after each block, go take a break. If you're in the zone, especially I'd say like in the middle of blocks, sometimes you're in the zone, you can probably do another one, do maybe 2 at a stretch, but make sure you go out at least after every 2 blocks. Take a break. Don't walk around too much. Do not Google what the right answers were. Just go get some food, get a little bit of caffeine, right, and step back in and save all that extra time. In the middle, if you need a break, if you're too tired from solving clinical vignettes, treat yourself. Take 10 minutes extra, eat your lunch, relax, and then go back in, get ready to kill the exam. So I say after every block, take a break. If you're in the flow state, continue, but do not do more than 2 at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's great to hear. And so, concluding this up, what is your final message to us? Just put it in one, try to put it in a sentence, the final message, step to CK. I know it's hard. It's going to be hard. That's your final message and for step to CK.
I'd say you don't need to know too much about the exam. Just know a little bit about everything, and you should be fine. Do your own research, know a little bit about everything, and you should do well on the exam. That's it. Just know a little bit about everything, and you're gonna do well. That's what step to CK is all about. All you need to know is how not to kill a patient. That's it.
That's a nice way to put it. How not to kill a patient for step to CK.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, I'm so
That's true.
thankful for like you coming here and taking your time, like your valuable time, and spending it with us and giving us a lot of knowledge on how to approach Step 2 CK, because it's gonna become a big boom after like 2 years, because everybody's gonna be like Step 2 CK, yeah. So
Step 2 CK is very much, the Wild West out there. And I personally know how isolating and how frustrating it is to study for Step 2 CK. So if anybody, if I can help somebody out by telling people what I already know, I'm very happy, Nobody should have to go through what most people are going through right now, Uncertainty is not good for you, So yeah, I'm very glad to put the knowledge out there. And hopefully in the future, other people put out the knowledge too. So we can maybe develop a new method for Step 2, make things easier for other people, give back. Yeah.
okay, thank you, by the way. I'm so like happy you came here, and thank you so much, by the way.
Yeah, cool. My pleasure.